Hello, my TCAS tentpoles. I am so excited because today I'm actually doing an interview with a friend of mine, Geoffrey Clark. Now, Geoffrey Clark reached out to me, I think through Twitter, right? That was the first. So I definitely encourage you to be on Twitter because you never know how you could make business relationships or friendships, for that matter, on social media. I know it's weird to start a Twitter for people who don't have Twitter, but I definitely recommend it. So anyhow, I'm very excited to be in this space because this is the first time I'm ever doing sort of like an interview over Skype for my show. So that's really exciting. And then the really cool part about this too is that Geoffrey has a podcast that he does, 90s Youth Life. And so I'm going to show you a bit of our interview, and then I'll push you over to his podcast so that you could listen to the whole interview through the podcast. So that'll be really cool. So a little bit about it, how I know him now. He was a fan of the show Kid Songs that I did when I was younger. And so he reached out to have me on his show. And so we did an interview, and then we did another video where we were talking about the Christmas, the Kid Songs Christmas. So it's been really cool. So we've becoming good friends. So that's great. So anyhow, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Geoffrey Clark. And here he is. All right, there you
Hello,
are.
everybody out there in YouTube land. I am happy to be on this wonderful show. It's a little bit of a smaller show, but it's a show nonetheless. So I'm happy to be on it.
Cool. This is really old school, as you can see. I'm videotaping. Anyway, whatever. We all start somewhere, right? We all start somewhere. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a couple of questions for you, Geoffrey. Just like total random questions, and then we're gonna see where the conversation takes us.
Okay.
Is that cool? All right. So the first question, I'm just curious. What makes you, in your own mind, what makes you unique?
I think what makes me unique is that I'm very passionate about the things that I'm passionate about. For instance, I became a huge sports fan when I was 7 years old, thanks in no small part to the Chicago Bulls dynasty led by Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the like. So basketball was my first sports love, and that was followed by baseball, and then all the other sports just kind of fell into place after that, even though those two sports are my first love. And then probably when I was in high school, I really got stoked up about nostalgia for my childhood, because that's when YouTube was first starting to come out, and so there are all these video clips that I hadn't seen in years, and I was like, oh, I remember this, I remember that, and it's just been kind of like a non-stop wave of nostalgia ever since. And that eventually led to my podcast, which we'll get into the creation of in a little bit. But there was another episode on my podcast where I went back to my college radio station this past year for its 50th anniversary. And I was so excited to be back on the airwaves. And a lot of people I knew from my college days were there. And after I was done reintroducing myself to the college radio audience, I went back out into the hallway, and everybody was applauding me, probably because of how passionate I was for everything with the radio station there. And I was also that's not nostalgia. I was passionate about writing sports and broadcasting sports, since I realized I couldn't be an athlete because I don't have the genes and I just don't have the talent. So I figured I would do sports in other ways, including last year actually scoring baseball games for some independent league teams in Gary, Indiana, and Schaumburg, Illinois. And then probably one thing a lot of people don't know about me, or maybe to a smaller degree they know, is that when I was 5 years old, probably around the time I started watching Kid Songs, Chris, I was watching Garfield and Friends, and then I saw the comic strip Garfield. So I have loved Garfield unconditionally ever since then. So I think what makes me unique is that that's kind of a long-winded answer, but just to go back to the beginning of that answer, I love the things that I love to do, and I think that something that really keeps people going is that if you're not around, you can't really do the things that you love anymore. So you have to find ways to keep going no matter what that takes.
Wow. if it's anything that I've gathered from knowing you for this time is that you are definitely a labor of love kind of individual. Listening to your podcast, I get a sense of I can see why they were applauding you. I want to know, like, when they were applauding you, you're walking down those halls. How is it like getting gratification in person, and then getting gratification from like your listeners, like through comments or things like that? Like, how does that? How are those different, or how do you feel with those types of gratification?
Well, just kind of going back to that particular day. I always stood out for one reason or another, maybe because I didn't always fit in with the norm that other people would expect. I think some people expected it to be more low-key, or because people have grown up and they've got jobs now and they've got families now, so they don't really have time to think about the things that they used to be passionate about because they're always living in the moment. But to me, it's always important to know where you came from. And I never really let go of those memories. In fact, they actually had to literally push me out the door to finally let the then current students, get some airtime, because I think they thought I was taking away from some of it. But the people that I did go to school with, they were happy to know that I was still very passionate about that station. And as for the podcast, I don't get a whole lot of feedback. I'll be perfectly honest with that. I'm just like a spoke on the wheel, to borrow that cliche, as far as the numerous other nostalgia podcasts out there. And there are some people who put more effort into it than I do, and some people who are more technically into it than I am. They know a little bit more about certain things and more about the technology that it takes to make them. I'm just recording with Audacity. But I still enjoy it nonetheless. And whenever somebody says that they like what I have to hear, I am excited to know that I made a difference in one person's life. I mean, I'll be totally honest, probably outside of maybe you, my girlfriend is probably the only regular listener of this podcast, but I really like when somebody says, hey, you made me remember this, or I may not remember this, but I'm happy that you told me about this thing that existed way back when. So it's a very gratifying experience, and again, not something I get a whole lot of, but something I'm very happy to experience when it does happen.
I definitely relate with you on that spectrum, because on my YouTube show on TCAS, I have about 2 regular TCAS tent poles, who I call my tent poles because I'm building the tent of TCAS. Anyway, whatever. But I totally feel you, because it is a labor of love. It's just because we love doing it that we keep doing it. Which podcast entry are you most proud of that you've done in your time of doing podcasts?
Well, that's a really good question, but I think anytime I'm able to get a guest on, I am very happy to have that happen. And I've had guests from different areas of nostalgia, 90s nostalgia, and just the internet in general. My first interview that I did was with a guy by the name of Ryan Alexander Tanner, who recapped, pretty much hate-reviewed every episode of Full House, all 8 seasons of it. And I was able to again, to talk about shortly after that project wrapped up, because there's only finite number of episodes of Full House, so it had to end sometime. But obviously, when I got you and your former fellow cast member Hassan to talk about kid songs, I mean, I was only expecting to get one person to talk about the show, but I ended up getting 2, thanks in part to your big promotion of the interview that we did. The one episode that I have on my podcast that I have on YouTube is when I interviewed Greg Lee, the host of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, another PBS show of yours.
Whoa, and, yeah, I remember that show.
Yeah, you're blown away by that, I can tell. But that was on my birthday that I recorded that episode, actually. So that was a dream come true. Obviously, I was way too young to have ever considered being on the show. Plus, I didn't live in New York, which I think was all they were looking for. So getting to actually talk to the man himself, who I'd known on TV since I was like 2 years old, that was probably the most satisfied I ever had doing an episode. And then a little more recently, I've had friends and family on the show talk about things that I wasn't so well versed in, but they were definitely passionate about. For instance, my sister, who just got married in May, on Memorial Day weekend, actually, she came back home to talk about the Harry Potter series. She's a Harry Potter head. I am not, so I figured she'd be a perfect person to talk to. Then another good friend of mine who actually inspired me to start this podcast, but again, we'll get into that in a bit. Right before he moved to Washington, D.C. to take a job with NBC News Radio, he was a huge Blink-182 fan, so I visited him downstate from where I live right before he left, and he was able to talk about Blink-182 for a while. And then most recently, I have a friend who likes to do simulations of former sports teams. So he actually came here and we simulated what would have been the 1994 Major League Baseball playoffs. And
Wow.
because he uses this tool for a sports blog of his, because I don't know if you know this, maybe you do, but the 1994 Major League Baseball season was canceled early because of a player strike, and there were no playoffs that year. So anytime I'm able to get somebody else on, it's really gratifying feeling for me. Oh, and one more person that I was able to talk to was my former coworker at my old job. It turned out he was an extra in the movie Rookie of the Year. And after I did that episode, talked about his experiences, we got the attention of Thomas Ian Nicholas, who played Henry Rowan Gardner, the lead character in Rookie of the Year. So, again, anytime it's more than just me on the podcast, that's probably the most I'm satisfied doing this, because it's an actual podcast episode and not just one person reading from a script or going off their minds, because again, I'm only one person, and who wants to hear about the thoughts of just one person? Well, obviously a couple people do if they're regularly listening.
Yeah. Wow, Thomas Ian Nicholas, he is a cutie. I want to interject with a little bit about your master's program, because